Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Paths and Disciplines. Tonight I will be doing the structures of magical trance. I do want to first put out there, viewer discretion is advised. I will be talking on some subjects that may not be appropriate for children. So what is the structures of magical trance? Covering this first before I cover the second basic structure of magic, or the IOA formula, or the Omni-Nil formula, because we need to understand why and how to reach a certain state of gnosis or trance. The different modes that are used, the inhibitory mode and the excitatory mode. And then after I'll break it down as we go along. This is actually important for any type of magical procedure or practice. From just meditation to cleansing to working with sigils, charging objects. It's all a form of trance and gnosis work. For those that remember the basic structure of the psyche, the formula, gnosis is a part of it. It's a part in everything we do and every work with. So, the structures of the magical trance. Peter Carroll, the founder of Chaos Magick, is credited with drawing attention as magicians to the significance of magical trance, which is defined as gnosis, which clearly breaking it down into various categories at the same time. Carroll basically distinguishes between two types of gnosis in his book Liber Null, namely the inhibitory mode and the excitatory mode. The inhibitory mode and excitatory mode are thus: death posture, which is a form of yoga; sexual excitation; magical trance connection; magical trance concentration; emotional arousal, fear, anger, love, etc.; sleeplessness, pain, torture, fasting, flagellation, exhaustion, dancing, drumming, chanting, gazing, right away of walking, hypnotic or trance-inducing drugs, excitatory or inhibitory drugs, sensory deprivation, hyperventilation, sensory overload. At this time, I want to clearly state, in no way, in no form, do I recommend the use of drugs. And I will explain later in the discussion, but I do not even suggest the use of it. That is up to your own discretion, and if you do, but just know there's consequences with it. These are the two basic principles of magic, namely the spiritual blazing of a fire and the establishment of spiritual peace as deep as the ocean, are both reflected in the trance structure. The type of trance chosen depends just so much on the temperament of the magician as on the goals of one's corresponding magical operation. Concentration leading to magical trance. Objective concentration. This includes the tart trick. To look or to gaze is what it means in Sanskrit. Among other things, of course, this form of concentration can be expanded in numerous ways. Second concentration, the magician concentrates on acoustically perceptible, articulated, or imagined sounds, usually mantras, in order to block verbal thoughts from intruding while at the same time developing a key to words of power and a skill of spellcasting. Image concentration. The magician concentrates on images of symbols such as a circle, a cross, a square, a triangle. More complicated image sequences can be used, such as certain mantras where you look at it and just swirls. You know what I'm talking about. I can't remember exactly what they're called at the top of my head. But those are also things. I mean, you could do a circle that is colored all bright yellow and stare into it. Image concentration is what we do when we create and charge seals. But it's also a form of meditation as well, watching the image until it goes black. There's nothing there. This is a key to mental magic and working with the magical double, as well as to create psychons and charging signals through staring. Even demonology relies heavily on this technique. With these three forms of concentration, the magician can gain control of the parts of one's mind that are responsible for both pictorial as well as verbal thoughts, which heard me state, verbal thoughts is where silence is the true meaning of silence. Surely, if we focus on a magical statement of intent, this becomes an extremely powerful magical technique, provided that we can maintain or better yet improve the state of trance reach in the meditation exercise. Now we'll get down and breaking down each of the categories that I had listed above. Sexual excitement, which I think would be much more everyone's favorite form, but yet most don't realize that it can induce a state of gnosis, a trance-like state, the ecstasy that we feel. A sexual excitement is one of the most powerful tools a magician has. During a state of sexual excitement, the sensor is blocked by up to 100%. The path to the subconscious is wide open and the magician is free to implant or impregnate in it anything one needs for his or her operation. Sexual excitement can be obtained by a number of methods that the individual prefers, but the magician should on occasion also use other methods that are not necessarily one's favorite. This should also be the rule of thumb for all magical practice. Cases in which this could be beneficial are operation that requires particularly strong energy, when sex magic practice has become strongly routine, in case of sexual oversaturation. Sexual excitement is especially suited for creating independent beings, psychogos. When working with partner, this partner could invoke and mentally embody certain principles or deities, followed by a sexual union with the invoked principle or a practice common to sexual magic and tantric operations. There's going to be another section where we get into covering some of this, but I also want to let you guys know, as it kind of stated, don't be afraid to explore. Don't rely on one of these over the other, because the true ability is to be able to reach these states without any of these. Sleeplessness, fasting, and exhaustion. With the help of these techniques, everyday reality is softened, and the magician becomes more receptive to subtle perception, since the sensors weakens with time. Described by Carroll as old monastic favorites, the inhibitory techniques are still part of the standard repertoire of all shamans and natural magicians today. The trick is for the magician to be able to turn the confused state of consciousness that these techniques will eventually produce into a true and powerful magical trance in which one retains enough control to impregnate oneself with a magical will at the moment you lose consciousness. However, over-exaggerated self-deprivation is useless. It's much wiser and more effective to find a moderate level of sleeplessness, fasting, and or exhaustion that custom fits the magician's mental and trained gnosis ability. But this is a matter of personal experience and is difficult for an outsider to judge, even though many magicians and shamans are able to develop a feel for the trance ability and depth of a person, and therefore help one accordingly in order for one to achieve optimal results. This is exactly what the participants in a group operation demand of a ritual leader, since him or her responsible for the act, storing, impregnating, and directing the energies of each participant on an equal level to reach a common goal. And another thing that wasn't listed in the above one, on the sexual excitement, since we mentioned fasting, we can also mention celibacy as another form. It just wasn't mentioned in the above statement because I kind of forgot to put it in there. And that is a very powerful tool. Gazing. We discussed this subject thoroughly in connection with the magic gaze, so you'll get no further explanation. Okay, so I haven't covered that yet, but you'll get further explanation when I cover that one. I do plan on doing the magical gaze, because I haven't written it up to post online yet anywhere. It's still sitting in my book of shadows. Okay, hypnotic or trance-inducing drugs. Regardless of the legal aspects associated with this subject, the use of drugs for magical purpose is generally, and I quote generally, and I don't even quote generally, is not recommended. Not recommended. This applies in particular to the beginners, especially those who have already experimented with many types of drugs and still do on a fairly regular basis. A trip is a far cry from a ritual, although a ritual does not necessarily lead to states of altered consciousness that strongly resemble those induced by the use of drugs. It doesn't work the other way around. Drugs blunt the sharp will. Now, let's get into the subject. Now that you know, for some people smoke weed, it's legal in your state, cool. Not, and like I said, there's laws. Do what you will. That'll be the whole law, so I'm going to say on that. But if you use them, it doesn't have that effect. So now we're kind of taking some people's favorite little toy and showing you that it's actually a tool. So the more you use, the more you need to reach that state. You're just dulling the objective. And therefore, those types of substances won't work for you. And you could endanger yourself by having to take way more than you normally would. I don't really want to cover the subject just because for me it was an eye-opener, and it actually made me realize that, hey, it's a tool that I can use in my magical practice. But if I'm doing it all the time, it's a useless tool, and I'm just abusing a tool. So if you're a serious magician, a serious practitioner, understand that it is a tool, so you might want to stop and just realize that it can help you reach those states of gnosis. But like all things, the more you do, the harder it is to reach those states. So I'm going to stay on that subject for a while. Sensory deprivation. The technique of a sensory deprivation was and still is used among monks and hermits alike, along with occasional practice of seclusion. Its goal is to reduce the number of external impulses that affect our rational thoughts, as much as possible, which will eventually cause it to paralyze due to a lack of stimuli. During a ritual, we create a sensory deprivation by using blindfolds, hoods, masks, and the element of darkness. Experience has shown that due to the shock effect, it causes it much more effective to shut out external stimuli for just a short period of time instead of banishing it entirely over a long period. Long-term sensory deprivation is usually more suited for mystical practices. As already mentioned, it strongly depends on the personal preference and goals of the magician as to which form of gnosis one should choose. It is obvious that an aggressive operation of magical warfare would be easier to perform with an excitatory trance than an inhibitory gnosis. On the other hand, such an operation could be aimed at breaking down the opponent or his or her situation, which would surely benefit more from a sort of corrosive inhibitory trance. It is important to master and not just arrive at a state of trance, otherwise it can lead to just the opposite of what the magician actually intended. That is why persistent practice in this field is high priority for all types of magic. There's a side note on this. Excuse me. The fact that it's not the same as blocking the conscious mind is often forgotten or overlooked. Emotional arousal. In principle, all emotional states can be used magically. However, experience has shown that rage, fear, and horror work most effectively. Even on a physical level, all three of these emotions can lead to the release of unexpected skill. Just think about the unbelievable sheer physical power of someone who is raving mad, or about the perseverance of the physical power of people in panic situations. The effectiveness of these three emotions is certainly just as strong as the sexual excitement, but not as much fun. But they have the disadvantage. They are quite difficult to arouse without a great deal of effort. Although systematic training can help remove some of the obstacles along the way, and every magician should undergo such training, it remains quite difficult to get a fit of rage on command and then use it magically. And guys, trust me, once you learn this little technique to do this, all emotions are pure forms of energy. Once you learn how to access that state, you can go from love to hate, fit, rage in a blink of an eye and have all those energies right there. And you can just turn it off and go back to love. And it's just a matter of training. Now, I'll give you an example. Using the imagery and stuff and accessing memories. That memory of what it feels like to that your first love, first true, real love, how you felt. That little memory right there can trigger it. So it's always good to have an enemy that you despise and hate, because just thinking on that will bring those emotions to bear. And it's learning to train our mind for such things. Now, be careful with that, because there's also the danger of, hey, you see that enemy, it's going to trigger it. So sometimes it might be good to imagine an enemy that doesn't exist, but you create that state of illusion in your mind as a trigger. Just food for thought on that. Pain, torture, flagellation. The BDSM section of this. For all you fetish lovers. Which, like I said, 50 Shades of Grey, yeah, might have been timid. Might not have been hardcore like some of the scenes are. But it's another aspect of being able to reach that state of sexual. So keep that in mind too. This method of trance is the complete opposite of sleeplessness, fasting, and exhaustion. While the later calms and inhibits, the former ignites body and spirit. Extreme pain always demaxes with either unconsciousness or lust, because the human body orgasm can only handle lasting pain through ecstatic acceptance. The patient practice of the Middle Ages with their jumping processes, precisions, and self-flagellations, the facus of Hindus, the Christians in Sri Lanka, and the Philippines. These are all examples of access to ecstasy by paralyzing the intellect and the sensor and sharpening the spirit to the same degree the magician requires for his or her magical operation. Of course, these methods have great disadvantages. They can lead quickly to ineffective and highly damaging excesses, because even if the human body is supposable quite insensitive to pain naturally or through conditioning, the stimuli threshold gets higher and higher until eventually only self-mutilation will be able to achieve the desired effect. I strongly warn against excessive use of this practice. I think that speaks for itself there, but the same principle for a lot of these things. Like as I was referring to the one that I said I do not recommend, nor do I suggest. In a sense, that's exactly what happens here with this one. We got to treat these as tools. They have a time and a place and a purpose. So one should not abuse or overuse. And like as I stated previously, the true goal of the magician is to be able to achieve these states of gnosis without this. These are just simple training techniques that allow you to reach each state. It trains the mind. That's all you're doing. Dancing, drumming, and chanting is a different story with dancing, drumming, and chanting. Practical alone or in group, these techniques can quickly lead to quite usable excitatory trances. The magician's music and gymnastic or lack of are of no great importance whatsoever, although group work requires more coordination than when working alone in the temple. Chanting includes mantras, solistes, songs, the telling of myths, and barbaric names of evocation, or magic spells and power words. Guys, this is an awesome little section because as you learn this and understand it, yes, everybody's hip to all the meditation music, but any form of music that can create emotion is another form for me. There's one of my favorite albums to meditate to and draw from and reach states of gnosis is Tool Anemia, the whole album, and other forms like Godsmack, their earth tones, their drum beats, the bass. These are all things we can use and implement to help reach our states or draw energy from. It's the vibrations that they sound off that charge us, give off the energy. Magical walking. Magic walking is a technique that's related to Zen walking but goes well beyond this. This involves walking for long stretches while using the 180-degree gaze, whereby the hands, fingers, and arms should be held in unusual positions. Experience has shown that pressing the thumbnail sideways onto the top of the sensitive pinky is quite effective. This creates a certain pain that is completely harmless as long as the skin isn't damaged. Eventually, thinking will cease and the mind will become totally absorbed in its environment. From this description, it is clear that this technique is not really suited for conducting ritual-specific operations, with the exception of charging a mantric seal, but it can be used quite effectively for training such states of consciousness. Excitatory and inhibitory drugs, mild hallucinogens, and hyperventilation, which I do not recommend this section, but it is there. Remember what we already said about the use of drugs and magic, because there's not much more to say. Excitatory and inhibitory drugs and mild hallucinogens. Remember, it is the dosage that counts. Include alcohol in small amounts, cannabis, cocaine, as well as LSD, masculine, cycled in along with modern designer drugs, and of course stimulants, amphetamines. Tea, usually hot, made from gangal root, is a milder yet still effective. This is a legal substance, by the way. But even black tea, coffee, and tobacco can have effect, although the price on one's health must be paid. This is why you shouldn't use drugs. But for those that don't smoke, unfortunately I smoke, so tobacco is not going to work for me. But if I go a couple of days without knowing I have an magical operation that I'm going to do, then I might need to be able to reach a certain state that I might not be able to attain. I could quit smoking for a few days because it's just mind over matter, and light one up and have that experience that allows me to trick that sensor to be able to reach that state of gnosis. Tea and coffee don't work for me because I drink both. It'd be like telling me to quit drinking Mountain Dew. It's not going to happen. Sensory overload. One of the classical methods of tantric training includes keeping the candidate awake over an extended period of time while his or her eyes are blindfolded, sleeplessness, then subject him or her to flagellation, pain, torture, loud music, water dripping in a sink or on top of the third eye. There's many ways to overload a person's sensory. These are just a few examples. As you guys can see, there's many ways, many forms. Now with some of these, I would recommend using the shock effect. A dark room, pitch black room, water dripping, to where you're bringing two different forms. But when you guys do this, it's best to have somebody there to walk you through and be a guide. All of these techniques are for allowing us to go from one state of consciousness to a deeper one. But our ultimate goal is to be able to go from one state to another without thought. And that takes time and plenty of training using one of these techniques or one of many that are not listed here. This is just a general reference, guys, of some of the techniques. There's many out there. You've got to find the ones that work for you. But at the same time, don't stick with just one because you're not taking yourself farther. You're not allowing yourself to go deeper into that state of gnosis. I fall under the 1%, so hypnosis don't work for me. And many of these things in here on this list don't work for me. But I've also got to the point where I don't need any of this. I can go from one state to the next. But that also comes with training, repetition, and practice. Because you could be having a bad day to where it's just your mind just cannot get itself off the bad day, but yet you need to be able to reach a certain state of gnosis to do some magical work. And by that, thus, you may have to rely back on one of these techniques. One of my favorite ones on subjects like that is closing my eyes and picturing nothing but blackness, picturing what I consider the abyss with a candle and staring into the flame, which is another technique. You can do it by just staring into the flame. As with all things in magic, is a personal preference to which you use, but let your ultimate goal, I'm going to repeat this again, be that you can enter a state of gnosis without thought, and that is done through repetition till it becomes no longer a thought process, but a natural one, without the use of trigger objects, word, object, pain, and the list goes on. Because in the end, you're going to quickly learn for everything we do, it requires a certain state of gnosis. Some of it comes natural to us. Deeper and more difficult operations require a deeper state of gnosis, as that will be breaking down in the second basic structure of psychic, which will be boring, or the second basic structure of magic, which is a boring read that everybody tells me, but they appreciate it after they understand it. So it might not be so boring if I put it on video and kind of have a little fun with it and explain it step by step. But to read it, yeah, it's boring. It was boring when I wrote it out, but it's important. It's very important because realizing what states of gnosis we need to reach a certain desired goal, the deeper the gnosis, the less obstacles that are in our way. In a sense, you want to look at it like a algebrated mathematical equation. Because in a sense, that's what it is. Our objective is take something that has a 1 in 1,000 chance of success to bring it into a 100% chance of success, which we all know not really probable. But 99 out of 100 ain't bad. Or 90 out of 100 is still close to perfection. And that's how we use our states of gnosis and other objects or other things. But the ultimate goal is to be able to do that through silence and then completely eliminate all obstacles, to be able to get the 100% with no obstacles. And it is feasible and possible if you can reach the right state of gnosis. That's going to be pretty much it for that one. I haven't decided which one I am doing next. It's either going to be the Omni-Nil formula or the IAO formula. Because they're it's going to be one of them because it's actually kind of important to have done and understand before we jump to the second basic structure of magic. I think it is going to be the Omni-Nil formula. Or I might do them both at the same time. There's not that long. No, I will not do them both at the same time because I want you guys to be able to watch, rewatch, and understand. So, I think it's the IOA formula I had scheduled next, so that's the one we'll be doing. Then after that, we'll jump right into the second basic structure of magic. What I might do, I might just do the IOA formula and the Omni-Nil formula separate tomorrow and just upload them. And tomorrow night do the second basic structure of magic as a live stream. I think that's how I'll do that. But I'll post them in the groups that I've been posting them so you guys can watch them. But I would recommend you guys check out my YouTube channel, like the videos, share them, subscribe to my channel. That way you know when I'm doing live and when I posting new stuff. I've started recording some stuff today that I'll be uploading because it takes a little bit of time to have to go from group to group to group to put the links in. And the less I see of people's interest in them, not sharing, not liking them, the less I'm going to be more inclined to keep, taking time out before I do these just to post them in the groups. I mean, in a sense, I rely on you guys' comments, feedbacks just as much because it also leads me into other discussions, other topics that I might say, oh, yeah, I know something about that. I'll cover something about that. Plus, I also want to learn too. And we learn by talking, sharing ideas and views with each other. So, but for the time being, I'm enjoying this, and it's not really a biggie. But I would like to be able to get, like I said, my goal is to be able to do, when I do these live feeds, is to be able to have at the end of them, question, answer session, that way everyone's benefiting. And if there's questions, I can answer them. I know some people don't like publicly leaving comments, but yet they got a question. And let me put it this way. The only dumb, stupid question is the one unasked. So I don't care how dumb you think it is, ask. Because the only question that's dumb is the one that isn't asked. I hope you guys enjoyed. You guys have a good night.